River Monsters takes me filming and fishing all over the world, and while we plan these expeditions meticulously, there's always one thing you can't control, and that's the weather.
What I do is I investigate stories of people who've been bitten, pulled under the water.
Oyce, there was a human being who faced real danger, deep struggles, and even heartbreaking personal challenges. To understand his journey, we must go back to where it all started, long before he became famous, when he was just a curious boy. In Suffolk, England, born in 1956 in Ipswich, Jeremy grew up in a quiet countryside home. His father was a vicar, so life for young Jeremy was structured, simple, and guided by faith and discipline. But while others around him were content with the calmness of village life, Jeremy found himself drawn to the nearby River Stour. By the age of 7, he was already sneaking away with a fishing rod. Not for sport or competition, but because of a deep curiosity about what lived under the water. The river became his classroom, and the fish became his teachers. He learned patience, respect, and observation skills that would later save his life in some of the world's most dangerous waters. As Jeremy grew older, his fascination only deepened. He didn't just want to catch fish, he wanted to understand them. This passion led him to study zoology at Bristol University. Unlike many students, Jeremy wasn't looking for fame, fortune, or even a career in television. He simply wanted answers. Why were some fish so elusive? How did they fit into their environment? What secrets were still hidden in rivers and lakes? After graduation, he earned a teaching certificate in biological sciences, but classrooms could never hold him. He longed for the real world, for adventures beyond maps and textbooks. In 1982, that longing pushed him toward his first great journey outside of England, India. With little money, almost no connections, and only a backpack and a fishing rod, Jeremy set off for the rivers of the Himalayas. His target was the mahseer, a legendary golden-scaled predator that locals described as more powerful than a freight train. For Jeremy, this wasn't tourism. It was a pilgrimage into the unknown. But what he didn't know was that this trip would nearly destroy him. In northern India, Jeremy traveled by train and bus, fishing with locals and asking endless questions. But in the tense political climate of the early 1980s, a foreigner with notebooks, cameras, and scientific equipment looked suspicious. Local authorities arrested him, accusing him of being a spy. Jeremy suddenly found himself in a tiny cell. Cut off from the outside world, he was interrogated, doubted, and treated as a potential enemy. He couldn't speak the local dialect, and no one could vouch for him. Days blurred into nights, and the fear of never being released consumed him. He later described this period as one of the darkest of his life, not because he was beaten or tortured, but because of the crushing helplessness. He had no idea if his family back in England even knew where he was. He didn't know if he would ever walk free again, by sheer luck. A sympathetic officer who recognized the word mahseer believed his story and intervened. Jeremy was finally released, shaken but alive. That experience marked him forever. For days after, he couldn't bring himself to fish. He sat silently by the river, staring into the water, trying to rebuild himself. He later called it a brutal awakening. It taught him that not all dangers come from wild animals. Sometimes the world itself can turn curiosity into suspicion. But even after that terrifying ordeal, Jeremy didn't quit. If anything, it made him more determined. He realized that chasing monsters wasn't just about catching fish. It was about surviving the unexpected and learning how fragile life really is. That realization would follow him into his next great adventure and expedition into the Amazon. One of the most dangerous places on Earth, the Amazon River is not just a river. It is a world of its own, stretching over 4,000 miles through thick, unforgiving jungle. It is home to deadly creatures, unpredictable storms, and countless diseases. Most people, it is a place to fear. But for Jeremy Wade, the Amazon was an obsession. In the early 1990s, still relatively unknown to the wider world, he set off to uncover the truth about creatures that locals whispered about: giant arapimas, flesh-eating piranhas, venomous stingrays, and river monsters that could cripple or even kill. His goal wasn't simply to prove their existence, but to separate fact from folklore and understand how they fit into one of the most complex ecosystems on the planet. Jeremy joined local fishermen, traveling by boat into remote tributaries and hacking through dense jungle with machetes. There were no luxuries, no safety nets, no hospitals, no cell towers, no way out if something went wrong. Each day was a gamble. Snake bites, jaguar sightings, and parasites in the water made survival a daily challenge. Drinking water had to be boiled, and food was often scarce. But it wasn't the predators of the jungle that nearly claimed Jeremy's life. It was something far more invisible. After weeks of exposure to heat, dirty water, and lack of proper nutrition, he fell violently ill with a parasitic infection. At first, it was just headaches and exhaustion. But soon, his condition worsened: dizziness, vomiting, and a fever so high he could barely stand. Jeremy later described the experience as being trapped inside his own body. He couldn't eat, couldn't walk without stumbling. At night, lying in a hammock with soaked clothes and shaking limbs, he wondered if this was how his story would end, alone, nameless, swallowed by the endless green of the Amazon. The locals cared for him, guarding him day and night, but there was no guarantee he would recover. In many cases, a sickness like his could be fatal in such remote conditions. But somehow, through a combination of traditional remedies, the strength of his own body, and sheer willpower, Jeremy survived. Weak and emaciated, he refused to leave the Amazon without accomplishing what he came for. And then, against all odds, he achieved one of the greatest catches of his life, an arapaima, one of the largest freshwater fish in the world. Over 7 feet long and weighing more than 200 pounds, the arapaima had avoided scientists for years. Jeremy didn't just catch it. He studied it, filmed it, and gathered enough information to contribute to real scientific knowledge. For him, it wasn't about glory. It was about discovery, about adding to the understanding of nature. He returned from the expedition thinner, scarred, and forever changed. The Amazon had nearly killed him. But it also gave him something more valuable than any trophy catch and epiphany. Jeremy realized that the true monsters of the world were not always the fish lurking below the surface. Sometimes the monsters were inside us: our arrogance, our limits, our refusal to respect nature. He saw how fragile human beings really are and how easily nature can humble us. This experience became the foundation for his future work. It wasn't just about showing the world scary creatures. It was about showing the relationship between humans and nature, how we are not always in control, how dangerous it can be when we forget that. Years later, when River Monsters premiered on television, audiences were captivated not only by the terrifying fish Jeremy pursued, but also by his calm wisdom. He didn't just show the danger, he explained it, respected it, and revealed what these creatures meant to their ecosystems. Fans around the world admired his bravery, but few knew the physical and emotional scars he carried from those early journeys. And while his battles with wild rivers and monstrous fish became legendary, Jeremy would soon face a different kind of struggle, one that had nothing to do with nature, but everything to do with personal heartbreak. By the time River Monsters reached its later seasons, Jeremy Wade was no longer just a fisherman. He was a global storyteller. Millions of viewers tuned in to watch him face deadly waters and elusive creatures. But observant fans began to notice something different about him. His eyes seemed less bright, his narration more reflective, his tone heavier. Behind the scenes, Jeremy was carrying a burden that had nothing to do with rivers or fish. It was a private tragedy, one that he never fully shared with the public. Jeremy has always been private about his personal life. Unlike many television personalities, he never built his fame on drama or gossip. He focused on his work, on the rivers, and on the creatures he wanted the world to see. But according to friends and insiders, around 2016, Jeremy experienced a personal loss, possibly the death of a longtime partner or a close family member. He never announced details, never confirmed rumors, and never spoke about it publicly. But the grief showed in subtle ways. During interviews, he admitted to stepping away from filming, partly because of exhaustion and personal reasons. On screen, his storytelling took on a more somber tone. Episodes became less about thrills and more about reflection. It was as if he was channeling his grief into the stories he told. For someone who had faced jaguars, venomous catfish, and wrongful arrest, it might be easy to think that nothing could break him. But grief is different. It is not a predator you can fight. It is not a river you can navigate. It is a weight that you carry in silence. Jeremy chose not to make his pain public, and in many ways, that choice speaks volumes about his character. He was never interested in using his personal life for attention. Instead, he kept moving forward, continuing to tell powerful stories. Through river monsters and beyond. What makes Jeremy Wade's story so heartbreaking is not just the dangers he faced in rivers across the globe, but the resilience he showed in life's quiet battles. He survived arrest, illness, and near-death encounters. He survived heartbreak and private loss. And yet, through it all, he kept going back to the rivers. He kept chasing the unknown, not just for himself, but for all of us watching. His journey reminds us that the greatest monsters are not always the ones with sharp teeth or venomous spines. Sometimes the monsters are inside us: fear, grief, helplessness. Surviving them requires as much courage as any jungle expedition. Today, Jeremy Wade remains a symbol of curiosity, resilience, and respect for nature. His story is more than an adventure. It is a reminder of how fragile human life is, how dangerous the world can be, and how strength is often found not in fighting monsters, but in surviving them. Behind every legendary catch, behind every episode of River Monsters, there is a man who has endured more than we can imagine. And yet, even with scars on his body and pain in his heart, Jeremy Wade continues to inspire. His story shows us that life, much like the rivers he explores, is unpredictable, dangerous, and at times heartbreaking. But if we have patience, courage, and respect, we too can face the monsters in our own lives. Jeremy Wade is a man that many people around the world know because of his famous television show, River Monsters. On the surface, it looked like a thrilling adventure series where a brave explorer traveled to dangerous places to catch huge fish and uncover mysterious legends. But when you look closer, you discover a very different story. Behind the cameras, Jeremy's life was full of personal sacrifices, pain, and moments of deep sadness that were not always visible to viewers. From the very beginning of his career, there were signs that the life he had chosen would not be easy, often spoke in ways that showed he was carrying emotional weight. Over time, his narration began to include not just facts about fish or rivers, but also reflections about mortality, solitude, and the cost of living a life dedicated to chasing the unknown. His words slowly changed in tone, becoming more serious and sometimes even sorrowful. There is one famous moment that gives us a window into what he was really feeling. While filming an episode in Southeast Asia, Jeremy began speaking to the camera about the river in front of him. But then, something unusual happened. Stopped mid-sentence, fell silent, and simply stood there for several long seconds. Explanation? He walked away into the jungle by himself. For almost an hour, he disappeared. None of the crew members asked where he went. Later, in a short article he wrote, Jeremy described that river with only a few haunting words. The river doesn't care about your sorrow. It just keeps flowing, swollen with silence. That small piece of writing revealed more about his emotional state than anything he ever said in an interview. It showed that Jeremy was struggling with private pain, and the rivers he filmed became not just backdrops for his adventures, but mirrors reflecting his own life. A life like Jeremy Wade's demanded huge sacrifices. He spent years traveling endlessly, moving from one dangerous location to another. This meant he missed family events, important holidays, and even final goodbyes. Rumors have long circulated that Jeremy was once in a serious relationship, but the strain of his unpredictable lifestyle eventually caused it to collapse. Other whispers suggest something even more tragic. That someone close to him may have died while he was away filming on the other side of the world. Jeremy has never confirmed these stories, but you can sense the truth in the way he sometimes faltered when speaking about loss and nature. The sorrow was imprinted in his silences and in those rare moments when he let his guard down. What made Jeremy different from other TV hosts is that he allowed his pain to become part of his storytelling. Viewers noticed the way he sometimes spoke about rivers and monsters with a kind of vulnerability.
Oh.
It made him more relatable. He wasn't just an unbreakable adventurer anymore. He was a man who had faced tragedy. And yet, he kept returning to the rivers. He never used his pain as an excuse to quit. Instead, he used it as a reason to search deeper for meaning, healing, and answers in the wild places of the world. The rivers were no longer just mysterious landscapes. They became companions to him, reflecting both his strength and his grief. 4. Viewers sitting comfortably at home, river monsters looked like a thrilling but safe form of entertainment. Each episode showed Jeremy traveling to remote places, meeting local people, and catching giant fish that most of us could never imagine seeing in real life. But behind the scenes, the reality was brutal. Every journey left him with bruises, scars, illnesses, and exhaustion that pushed him to his limits. When the show first aired in 2009, Jeremy was already in his early 50s. Most men at that age were slowing down, settling into quieter lives, but Jeremy chose a much harder path. Instead of enjoying comfort, he was hauling 100-pound river. Fish from the water, hiking through swamps in unbearable heat, and carrying heavy equipment across jungles where every step could be dangerous. He wasn't telling survival stories, he was living them. One of the most frightening moments happened in Papua New Guinea. Jeremy was bitten repeatedly by insects until he developed a dangerously high fever. Soon after, doctors confirmed he had contracted dengue fever, a painful and exhausting mosquito-borne illness. His body ached, his joints throbbed, and he could barely stand. Any ordinary person would have stopped filming and gone home to recover, but Jeremy refused. He continued working even though every movement drained his energy. That stubborn dedication to finishing his work is one of the reasons people admire him so much. The dangers didn't stop with sickness. Because Jeremy spent so much time in rivers filled with unknown bacteria, even small cuts and scrapes often turned into infections. In places like the Congo or the Amazon, a simple wound could quickly become life-threatening. Once a thorn became lodged dangerously close to a blood vessel in his leg. Doctors later warned that if it had not been removed in time, it could have caused deadly sepsis. Another time, while wrestling a stingray in Argentina, Jeremy was dragged underwater and nearly pinned to the riverbed. He came out of the water breathless and shaken, but still determined to keep going. A massive goonch catfish left him with bruised ribs and sore muscles. But Jeremy often said the worst injury was not from fish or stingsit, was from exhaustion. Weeks of filming in extreme conditions with very little rest slowly wore down his body. Even though he endured so much, Jeremy almost never complained on camera. He believed that if you start a story, you must finish it, even if it costs you something. He once said, "If you don't come back from a trip with at least one scar, you probably didn't go far enough." That line wasn't bravado, it was experience. Those scars, both physical and emotional, became part of who he was. Over time, though, fans began to notice that Jeremy was moving more carefully in later seasons. The endless travel and hard work had taken their toll. He suffered from chronic back pain and other health problems. He admitted that sometimes just getting out of bed to tie his boots required all the strength he had left. The physical risks were only part of the story. Travel schedule itself was exhausting. One year alone, Jeremy visited more than a dozen countries, often crossing from one climate to another every few days. His immune system weakened, and his body was constantly adjusting to new environments. There were moments when he fainted from altitude sickness, like in Mongolia, where he blacked out after a long climb. That incident scared both him and his crew, and it was one of the first times he truly realized how close he was to the edge. Even though he accepted these dangers, it was clear that the cost of living this kind of life was becoming heavier each year. Despite all of this, Jeremy continued to push forward. What started as a show about scary fish slowly turned into a mission. He began to realize that the stories about monsters were often connected to deeper truths about the people and environments around them. In many cases, the monsters weren't evil at all. They were misunderstood animals, struggling to survive in polluted or overfished waters. Jeremy once explained, "You start with a story about a monster, but what you often find is a much bigger story about the people who live with that fear." That realization changed the way he approached his work. As River Monsters continued, Jeremy became more than just a TV host. He became a teacher, a conservationist, and even a humanitarian. When villagers feared dangerous fish, Jeremy would sometimes spend extra time teaching children about water safety or distributing life jackets. In some remote areas, the production crew brought basic supplies, medical kits, and water purification equipment. These moments rarely made it into the final episodes, but they showed another side of Jeremy, the man who cared deeply about the people living along the rivers he visited. By the time River Monsters aired its final episode in 2017, Jeremy had filmed for 9 seasons across more than 30 countries. The show had become legendary, but the years of strain had clearly changed him. For many viewers, it seemed like the end of an era. But for Jeremy, it was not an ending. It was the beginning of a new chapter. Unlike other TV personalities who chase spin-offs and fame, Jeremy was never interested in the spotlight. Fame was something that made him uncomfortable. He once admitted that being recognized in airports or asked for selfies felt strange. To him, the work was always about the mission. It's not about celebrity. After River Monsters, Jeremy returned with a new show called Mighty Rivers. This series was different. Instead of chasing dangerous creatures, he focused on the rivers themselves. Great waterways like the Amazon, Ganges, Mississippi, and Yangtze. The pace of the show was slower, more reflective. Jeremy spoke about pollution, overfishing, and climate change. He interviewed scientists, local fishermen, and conservationists, bringing attention to the environmental crises threatening these rivers. For viewers, it was a chance to see Jeremy in a new role, not just an adventurer, but a guide helping us understand the dangers humans are creating for our planet. In 2020, he launched another series, Dark Waters. This time, the focus was on mysteries such as strange disappearances, unexplained lake legends, and toxic water events. It blended folklore, science, and investigation. Once again, Jeremy showed that his curiosity for the unknown had not faded, it had simply evolved. Behind the scenes, he also returned to his academic roots. Jeremy studied zoology at Bristol University and had once worked as a teacher. In his later years, he gave talks, wrote books, and continued to share his knowledge with audiences. His books, River Monsters, True Stories of the Ones That Didn't Get Away and How to Think Like a Fish, became bestsellers. In them, he shared not only stories of adventure, but also life lessons about patience, resilience, and learning from failure. The heartbreaking truth of Jeremy Wade's story is that his greatest battles were never against fish. They were against the toll that such a life took on his body and soul. He lived through illnesses, loneliness, exhaustion, and private tragedy. Yet he always returned to the rivers. He always chose to face the unknown, no matter the cost. That resilience is what makes his story so powerful. He wasn't just catching monsters, he was confronting the struggles of being human. Even now, Jeremy remains a symbol of endurance and dedication. It reminds us that nature is not just a backdrop for adventure, but a mirror that reflects our own lives. The rivers he explored continued to flow, carrying both mystery and sorrow. Just as his journey carries both triumph and sacrifice. His story teaches us that true adventure is not about being fearless. It's about pushing forward, even when you are tired, afraid, or broken. So when you think of Jeremy Wade, don't just remember the man pulling giant fish out of muddy rivers. Remember the man who faced heartbreak, pain, and exhaustion, yet still chose to keep going. Remember the man who taught us that monsters are not always what they seem, that sometimes the scariest battles happen within ourselves. Jeremy Wade is often remembered as the fearless fisherman who pulled terrifying river creatures from the depths, but many people don't realize just how much preparation, discipline, and sacrifice went into his life before the cameras ever rolled. His journey to becoming the host of river monsters wasn't something that happened overnight. In fact, it was years of struggle, self-discovery, and hard lessons that shaped him into the man we know today. Before fame, Jeremy lived a modest life. He studied zoology at the University of Bristol and later became a biology teacher. Even then, his heart longed for adventure, saved every bit of money he could, and often traveled to remote places. Sometimes with nothing more than a backpack, a fishing rod, and a notebook. In those early years, he lived with very little. He often slept in cheap hostels or under the open sky, eating whatever he could find. This was not glamorous exploration, it was survival. Jeremy himself has admitted that for a long time he had no idea if he would ever make it in life. What drove him wasn't fame or money, it was curiosity. He wanted to know what lived in the rivers that most people were too afraid to even go near. One of the most defining features of Jeremy's personality is his patience. Fishing itself demands long hours of waiting, but Jeremy's patience went beyond that. He could wait days, even weeks, just to catch one glimpse of a fish that locals spoke of in whispers. There are stories of him spending hours sitting perfectly, still in sweltering heat, swarmed by mosquitoes, with nothing to show for it at the end of the day. Yet he would return the next morning with the same determination. That kind of endurance isn't just physical, it's mental. It shows a rare kind of obsession and dedication that not many people could sustain. But patience doesn't mean peace. Behind his calm voice and careful movements, Jeremy fought many battles with fear. He has admitted that, many times, he questioned whether he was making the right choices. The waters he entered were not just filled with fish, but with danger crocodiles, snakes, parasites, and diseases that could kill him. He also carried the heavy knowledge that if something went wrong in a remote jungle, help might never come. In time, crew members later revealed that there were nights when Jeremy would lie awake, listening to the sounds of the wild and quietly wonder if he would make it back home alive. That inner fear, kept hidden from the audience, was part of the emotional toll of his work. One of the things that makes Jeremy's story unique is how his adventures went far beyond catching fish. He became a bridge between science and culture. In many villages, people had grown up with myths about river monsters, giant catfish that swallowed children, spirits that dragged people underwater, or stingrays that carried curses. Instead of mocking these beliefs, Jeremy listened to them with respect. He took local legends seriously because he knew they often contained seeds of truth. By doing so, he built trust with the communities he visited. Many times, people who were afraid of outsiders welcomed him because he honored their stories. This cultural connection gave his work a deeper meaning. It wasn't just about solving mysteries, but about understanding people's fears and hopes. Another rarely spoken detail is how Jeremy handled loneliness. Traveling for months at a time, far away from family and friends, created a quiet emptiness that even adventure couldn't fill. Crew members have mentioned that after long days of filming, Jeremy often chose to sit alone by the riverbank, staring into the water in silence. It wasn't just preparation for the next day's shoot, it was reflection. He was a man who found meaning in solitude. Some believe that his connection with rivers came from this very feeling. Rivers, after all, flow endlessly and silently, carrying both life and death within them. In many ways, they mirrored his own emotional journey. As Jeremy grew older, physical demands of his career became harder to bear. But instead of giving up, he adapted. He shifted his focus from chasing monsters to protecting rivers. This change reflected not just a professional decision, but a personal evolution. He realized that his true legacy would not be measured by the number of giant fish he caught, but by the awareness he raised about the fragility of our planet's waterways. Through mighty rivers and dark waters, he became not just an explorer, but a conservationist and teacher. His voice carried urgency when he spoke about pollution, deforestation, and overfishing. He wanted people to understand that the real monsters threatening rivers were not fish, but human actions. His books also reveal much about the man behind the camera. In How to Think Like a Fish, Jeremy doesn't just share fishing techniques, he shares life lessons, compares fishing to patience in relationships, persistence in work, and resilience in the face of failure. He explains that sometimes you will wait a long time for success and catch nothing, but that doesn't mean you should quit. Instead, it means you must keep showing up, keep trying, and keep believing that the next attempt might bring results. This philosophy reflects not only his fishing, but his entire life. Perhaps one of the most heartbreaking truths about Jeremy's story is the idea of what he gave up for his dream. Many people build their lives around family, stability, and comfort. Jeremy built his around risk, sacrifice, and constant movement. In interviews, he has sometimes hinted at regrets. He has spoken softly about missing out on the ordinary parts of life, birthdays, friendships, and long-term relationships. But he has also said that if he had chosen another path, he would have always wondered what mysteries the river still held. That restless spirit that need to search is what both gave him success and took away certain parts of his personal life. Even today, Jeremy's legacy continues to inspire countless people. Young viewers who grew up watching River Monsters now see him as more than just a TV host. He is a symbol of curiosity, strength, and dedication. He showed the world that adventure is not about being fearless, it's about facing your fears and pushing through them. He showed that life is not always about comfort, but about meaning. And he showed that even in solitude and sorrow, there can be beauty and purpose. In the end, Jeremy Wade's story is not just about rivers or monsters. It is about a man who followed his calling, no matter how painful or difficult it became. It is about the cost of obsession and the strength to carry that weight. And it is about finding truth not only in the deep waters of the world, but in the deeper waters of the human soul. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments below. What is one lesson you've learned from Jeremy's journey? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories that reveal the hidden struggles behind legendary lives.